The University of Central Florida has adopted radical DEI programming that segregates students by race, condemns the United States as a white supremacist culture, and encourages active discrimination against what it deems the oppressor class that's characterized as, quote, male, white, heterosexual, able-bodied, and Christian. This is from the story that I'm publishing this week that has uncovered all of these documents from within the University of Central Florida. And in a certain regard, it's standard fare. It's critical race theory passed through the filter of diversity, equity, and inclusion, ideology, and bureaucracy. You've seen it a million times. It basically says a couple things. One, America is a fundamentally racist nation. Two, you can divide society into oppressor and oppressed based on identity, predominantly racial identity. And then three, society, in this case the university, must actively discriminate against the oppressors in order to achieve what they call social justice. So that's the starting point. That's really the bedrock assumption of all of these DEI programs. But what's really interesting about the University of Central Florida is that the documents that I've uncovered reveal what this means in practice, right? It's one thing to say, America is racist, to scream it at the top of your lungs, standing on a wood box in the middle of the town square. Okay, fine. That is pure speech. Obviously, I disagree, but really, no harm done. People have a First Amendment right to express themselves. But what happens when that attitude, when that ideology, when that belief system translates to administrative practice? It becomes operationalized in the bureaucracy. You get something very different and you get something very sinister. And at UCF, this ideology has really created a regime of active discrimination, or if you will, racism in the name of anti-racism. And it covers everything. It covers faculty hiring. It covers student programs. It covers student admissions. It covers even student scholarships. And I'll go by one to show you exactly what this looks like. The first thing is faculty hiring. Traditionally, faculty is hired on the basis of what's called academic merit. These are objective measures of publication, credential, scholarly excellence, interviews, your capacity to teach, do research, and be a successful member of the academic community. But UCF has released a document internally called inclusive faculty hiring or equity-based hiring that says that merit is a myth. It says that merit is a problematic heuristic. It says essentially that merit is a smokescreen for racist domination and white supremacy, and that actually merit as an objective quality does not exist. It should be minimized. It should be deprioritized. It should be disfavored. Well, of course, then the question is, if you are disfavoring merit, what do you hire by? They say that you hire by the principles of diversity and inclusion. So this means active racial discrimination against what they deem oppressor or overrepresented groups. And so they do this in a couple ways, and you can actually see the process unfold through the documentation. They say, first of all, pepper your job announcement with left-wing buzzwords, such as racial equity, social justice, anti-racist, and mention specific group identities, with the exclusion, of course, of any white or European identities. You should mention only those that they call minoritized identities. Second, the university argues you need to put them through a process of submitting diversity and inclusion statements. And so what these serve as is, A, you can actually signal your identity within the statement, and at the very least, you can pledge allegiance to left-wing racialist ideology. You can say, I'm going to promote the principles of DEI in these ways, or I am a member of this identity group. It provides another filter, another mechanism of sorting people on the basis of race and ideology. And then third, and this is really the most dramatic, they say explicitly, at the end of every faculty hiring process, you should have one woman and one minority in the final group of people for interviews. And if you don't meet this explicit race and sex quota, you should scrap your hiring process altogether and start from square one. So in a sense, they're saying very clearly, discriminate on the basis of race, put people through a political loyalty test through these statements, and then set a racial quota against the principle of colorblind equality to ensure that you're bringing people in on the basis of their identity, not the basis of their pure academic merit. And then the next thing, okay, this doesn't just stop at faculty hiring. The University of Central Florida, they also argue that students must pass through a racial filter in order to participate. You have, I think, obvious racial discrimination in admissions at almost every large university in the country, but they take it a step further. They've set up these so-called affinity groups that segregate students by race and create separate spaces based on racial identity. These are psychological programs in this case that are administered by the counseling staff. Stuff like, quote, exploring vulnerability in POC spaces. So segregating whites out of the group, or restricting these things to Black identified, Afro-Latinx and students of African descent, or Asian identified students, or Hispanic and Latinx students, all given separate racial silos, excluding other groups, and then implementing this segregated procedure. And finally, and this is an actual clear violation of the law, this is illegal. We know that this is a violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, but they practice it with impunity. They've set up racially segregated scholarships. These are really very, very clearly discriminatory. Sometimes they couch it in euphemistic language and they say, we're discriminating on behalf of, quote, underrepresented populations. But other times they make it very clear. Some of the scholarships that are promoted and administered by UCF say, quote, candidates must be a member of one of the following racial groups: African American Black, American Indian Alaskan Native, Asian American Pacific Islander, or Hispanic Latino. In other words, you have to be among every racial group except for whites and white ethnicities like Jews, Italians, Irish, etc. And so, they're basically saying very clearly, no European Americans, no kids of European descent can apply for these scholarship opportunities. And so when you take this in sum altogether, you get something that is a really, obviously on the face of it, discriminatory. It's driven by a policy of racist, what they call anti-racist discrimination. Those words start to blend together and mean essentially the same thing at a certain point. And they've done so in the face of civil rights law, which prohibits things like racially segregated scholarships. And they've also done so in the face of opposition from the people of Florida and in the opposition of the legislators of the state of Florida. Nobody voted for this. Left-wing racialist bureaucrats have installed it outside of the democratic process, and they're imposing their will on the students, on the faculty, on the staff, and because these are public dollars, on the people of Florida. And so the remedy for this is quite clear. We should not be supporting, with taxpayer dollars, left-wing racialist bureaucracies that practice active discrimination against people based on their ancestry. These departments should be abolished. These practices of left-wing loyalty oaths, these practices of identity-based preferences, and these practice of racial quotas and hiring should be prohibited. And then the state of Florida should really enforce the law. And so I hope that the leaders at the University of Central Florida can immediately curtail these programs. And then I hope they can start getting ready to be abolishing some of these institutions that do nothing for students. They do nothing to advance knowledge. It's all about pushing left-wing ideology under the guise of scholarship. It's wrong. It should not be supported. It's sometimes illegal. And I look forward to the day when these kind of offices that practiced discrimination on the basis of ancestry are shut down and they send their people packing.